The first time I realized something was wrong, it wasn't because my husband lied to me. It wasn't because he disappeared for 3 days without answering a single call. And it wasn't because a stranger showed up at my front door carrying a thick manila envelope with my name printed across the front. It was because when I opened that envelope, the first page contained a sentence that shouldn't have existed. A sentence so insane that I actually laughed when I read it. Then I read it again, and my hands started shaking, because according to the document in front of me, my husband was suing a company for almost $800 million, dollars, and somehow I was listed as a co-conspirator, not a witness, not a spouse, not a beneficiary, a co-conspirator. The document claimed I had helped him hide assets, move money through shell companies, and deceive investors. The problem? I didn't even know what half those words meant. And the man accusing me was my own husband, the same husband who kissed me goodbye every morning, the same husband who told me he loved me, the same husband who swore we would grow old together, the same husband who was now telling a federal court that our marriage never legally existed. If you've ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were building a trap around you the entire time, then you already know what came next. But before I tell you how my husband tried to erase our marriage, steal my future, and turn me into the villain of a scandal worth hundreds of millions, I need to take you back to the beginning. Because none of this started in a courtroom. It started with a proposal, and what looked like the perfect life. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 34 years old, and until 8 months ago, I thought I was happily married. Not perfect, not fairy tale perfect, but happy. Or at least what I believed happiness looked like. I met my husband, Ethan Blackwell, 11 years ago. He wasn't rich then, not even close. When people hear his name now, they assume he was always successful. He wasn't. When we met, he was sleeping on a friend's couch and trying to launch a software company nobody believed in, including me. Not because I thought he was stupid, because I thought he was impossible. He talked about billion-dollar industries while eating instant noodles. He talked about changing the world while driving a car that barely started. He talked about building an empire while borrowing money for gas. Most people laughed at him. I didn't. I listened, and somehow, that made me different, at least according to him. 3 years later, he proposed. A small restaurant, no photographers, no audience, no social media announcement. Just a ring, a nervous smile, and a simple question. Will you build this life with me? I said yes, without hesitation, without conditions, without lawyers, without contracts, without imagining that one day those details would matter. For the first few years, things were normal. We rented an apartment, shared bills, argued over groceries, watched movies on old furniture, built a life together, then everything changed. Ethan's company exploded, not gradually, not slowly, overnight. One major contract became three. Three became 10. Investors arrived, money arrived, media attention arrived. And suddenly the man who used to worry about rent was worth more money than either of us knew how to count. The house came first, then another house, then vacation properties, then private memberships, then the assistants, the advisors, the lawyers, the security teams, the endless meetings. Every year there seemed to be more people around him, and less of him. At first I understood. Success requires sacrifice. That's what everyone says. And maybe it's true, but nobody talks about whose sacrifice. Have you noticed that? People always celebrate successful people. They never talk about the people left waiting at home, the spouses, the families, the people who keep believing. Tell me honestly, have you ever supported someone through years of struggle only to feel invisible once they succeeded? Because that's exactly what happened. At first it was small things. Missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, canceled vacations. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth fighting over. Then came the lies. Little lies, the dangerous kind. Not because they're huge, because they're easy. And once someone gets comfortable lying about small things, the big lies come naturally. I didn't know that yet. I learned it later, the hard way. About 2 years before everything collapsed, I started noticing a woman. Not because Ethan mentioned her, because he avoided mentioning her. Her name was Vanessa Cole. She worked for one of his investment firms. Every time her name appeared, Ethan changed the subject. Every time I asked about her, he laughed. Every time I expressed concern, he called me paranoid. Maybe you've experienced that before, when your instincts are screaming, but everyone keeps telling you you're imagining things. It's a horrible feeling, like being trapped inside your own head. And for a while, I believed him. Because trust doesn't disappear all at once. It dies slowly, one excuse at a time. Then came the gala, the night I should have walked away, the night everything became impossible to ignore. It was one of those charity events wealthy people love attending. Expensive dresses, expensive wine, expensive conversations nobody remembers afterward. I spent most of the evening smiling politely. Then I saw Ethan, across the ballroom, standing beside Vanessa. Too close, much too close, the kind of close married people notice instantly. She touched his arm. He smiled. She whispered something. He laughed, and suddenly I felt like a stranger watching someone else's marriage. When Ethan finally noticed me, something flashed across his face. Not guilt, fear, only for a second. Then it vanished, but I saw it. And once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. That night I confronted him. Nothing dramatic, no screaming, no accusations, just questions. Simple questions, the kind innocent people answer easily. Ethan didn't answer. He got angry, very angry, and that scared me more than any confession could have, because people who have nothing to hide don't usually react like that. They explain, they reassure, they communicate, they don't attack. But Ethan attacked, not physically, emotionally. He told me I was insecure, jealous, paranoid, controlling. By the end of the conversation, I was apologizing. Imagine that. I confronted my husband, and somehow I became the bad guy. Have you ever had that happen? Someone hurts you. You ask about it, and somehow you end up apologizing? It's one of the strangest forms of manipulation. And at the time, I didn't recognize it. 3 months later, I found the first document. A financial statement, nothing dramatic, just paperwork left on his desk. Except one detail caught my attention. Marital status, single. I stared at it, read it twice, then 3 times. Single. Not married, not separated, single. When Ethan got home, I showed him. He laughed, said it was an administrative error, said lawyers would fix it, said I worried too much. And once again, I let it go. Big mistake, huge mistake, because that wasn't an error. It was a warning. The real nightmare began 6 months later, on a Tuesday, at 9:14 in the morning, when someone knocked on my front door. I wasn't expecting visitors. I almost ignored it. But something made me answer. Outside stood a man in a dark suit, professional, expressionless, holding a large envelope. Claire Dawson? Yes, you've been served. Then he handed me the envelope, turned around, and walked away. No explanation, no conversation, nothing, just gone. Leaving me standing there, holding the thing that would destroy my entire life, at least temporarily, because inside that envelope was the first proof that my husband hadn't merely betrayed me. He had been planning something, for years, something so calculated, so ruthless, so unbelievable, that even now, people think I'm exaggerating when I tell them what happened. And the worst part, the lawsuit wasn't the real betrayal. The real betrayal was hidden on page 47, a single paragraph, buried deep inside hundreds of pages, a paragraph that claimed Ethan Blackwell and I had never legally been husband and wife, and according to the evidence attached, someone had spent years preparing to prove it. The question was, why? And the answer would destroy far more than our marriage. For 3 hours after that envelope arrived, I sat alone at my kitchen table. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't call Ethan. I just stared at page 47, over and over. The paragraph didn't change, no matter how many times I read it. No matter how many times I convinced myself I misunderstood it, the words stayed exactly the same. According to the filing, my marriage might not legally exist, and somehow my husband had evidence. A lot of evidence. Enough evidence that a federal court had accepted the filing. Do you know what terrified me most? Not the money, not the lawsuit, not even the possibility of prison. It was the realization that somebody had spent years preparing this. Years. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an emotional decision. This was a strategy, a plan, a blueprint. And I had no idea why. The first person I called wasn't Ethan. It was my friend Rachel. Rachel and I had been friends since college. She's the type of woman who can hear one sentence and immediately know when something is wrong. When she arrived 30 minutes later, she took one look at my face and stopped smiling. What happened? I handed her the papers. She read, then kept reading, then sat down very slowly. Oh my God, exactly. Oh my God. For the next hour we went through every page together, and somehow, the deeper we went, the worse it became. The lawsuit wasn't just about money. It involved investors, corporate fraud allegations, hidden accounts, offshore entities, and according to the documents, I was supposedly involved in all of it. The problem? I had never signed anything, never attended meetings, never touched company finances. I barely understood the business. So how was my name everywhere? Rachel found the answer before I did, buried near the back. One sentence, three devastating words. Spousal authorization attached. My stomach dropped. Attached. There were signatures, dozens of them, my signatures, or at least something that looked like my signature. I remember feeling physically sick, like all the air disappeared from the room, because suddenly the question wasn't why. The question was how. How long had this been happening? How many documents existed? How many times had someone signed my name? And why hadn't I noticed? Rachel looked up from the papers. Claire, Dad. What? I don't think this is just about money. Those words stayed with me, because she was right. Something felt bigger, darker, more personal. At 4:12 p.m., Ethan finally called. Not because he was worried, not because he loved me, because someone had informed him I was served. His first sentence told me everything. Not hello, not are you okay, not can we talk. His first sentence was, you shouldn't have opened that alone. I actually laughed, a sharp, bitter laugh, the kind that surprises even you. Opened what, Ethan? Silence. Then, the lawsuit. The lawsuit. Like it was normal. Like husbands routinely sue their wives into oblivion. Like this was an inconvenience, not betrayal. What exactly is happening? Another pause. Then he said something that changed everything. I can explain. Whenever someone says that, brace yourself, because explanations are usually confessions wearing better clothes. Ethan, yes? Are we married? Silence. Long silence. The longest silence of my life. Then, it's complicated. Complicated. Not yes. Not no. Complicated. My hands started shaking. Answer the question. Claire. Answer the question. More silence. Then finally, we need to meet. That night he didn't come home. Not because he couldn't, because he chose not to. The man who spent 11 years calling me his wife wouldn't answer whether we were actually married. And somehow, things were still getting worse. The next morning I hired a lawyer. Her name was Sarah Bennett, and within 10 minutes of meeting her, I realized Ethan was in serious trouble. Because Sarah wasn't impressed by money, or power, or billion-dollar companies. She was impressed by facts, and facts were suddenly becoming very dangerous. She spent 4 hours reviewing the documents, not rushing, not guessing, just reading, page after page, note after note. Then she leaned back in her chair and said something I'll never forget. Your husband has been preparing for a divorce that doesn't exist. What? She slid a document toward me. Corporate records, ownership structures, trust agreements, property transfers, asset movements. Hundreds of millions moving between entities. And every transaction shared one thing in common. My name disappeared, everywhere. Slowly, methodically, over years, almost like someone was erasing me. Look at the dates. I did. And my stomach twisted. The restructuring started 4 years earlier. 4 years, long before arguments, long before distance, long before Vanessa, while we were still celebrating anniversaries, while we were still planning vacations, while he was still telling me he loved me. He was already building an exit strategy. Have you ever discovered someone stopped loving you years before they admitted it? It's one of the cruelest feelings imaginable, because suddenly every happy memory becomes suspicious. Every smile, every gift, every promise. You start wondering what was real and what was performance. That's exactly where I was. Then Sarah showed me something even worse, a corporate filing, one that made my blood run cold, listed under domestic status, Ethan Blackwell, unmarried, no spouse, no marital obligations, no marital assets, nothing, for 3 years. 3 years. How is that possible? Sarah sighed, then looked directly at me. Because someone helped him. Vanessa. For weeks I'd assumed Vanessa was the affair. The mistress, the homewrecker. I was wrong. Vanessa wasn't the affair. She was the architect. The deeper Sarah dug, the more her name appeared. Corporate filings, investment transfers, trust amendments, property acquisitions, everything connected back to her. Everything. And suddenly pieces started fitting together. Late meetings, weekend conferences, emergency business trips, private flights, unexplained absences. Vanessa wasn't beside Ethan. Vanessa was helping Ethan build something, 3 days later, Sarah obtained discovery records, and that's when we found the photograph, one image, that changed the entire case. It wasn't romantic, not directly, no kissing, no obvious affair, nothing like that. It was worse. Much worse, because the photo showed Ethan and Vanessa exiting a private bank, holding documents Sarah immediately recognized. Trust transfer agreements, the exact agreements used to move ownership away from spouses during litigation. Claire, Sarah's voice was calm, too calm. The kind of calm lawyers use when delivering terrible news. What? I think he planned to leave you years ago. I couldn't speak, because deep down, I already knew. But if Ethan planned to leave me years ago, why stay? Why spend 4 years pretending? Why keep wearing the ring? Why keep saying I love you? Why keep me around? Sarah answered that question too. And when she did, everything finally made sense, because Ethan hadn't stayed because he loved me. He stayed because he needed me. Needed my name, needed my credibility, needed my reputation, needed my trust. The entire empire had been built on one assumption, that I would never look closely, and for years, I didn't. Then Sarah discovered something hidden inside a subsidiary, a tiny company, barely noticeable, one almost nobody would investigate. Except she did, because that's what great lawyers do. And what she found inside that company would eventually destroy Ethan's entire defense, because buried within thousands of files was proof that someone had forged my signature, repeatedly. For years, not one document, not 10, over 40. My name, my signature, my identity, used like a weapon against me. I remember staring out Sarah's office window, watching people walk below, completely unaware that my life was collapsing, and thinking one terrifying thought: if Ethan forged 40 signatures, what else had he done? The answer arrived 48 hours later, when Sarah called me at 6:17 in the morning. Her voice sounded different, urgent, concerned, almost shocked. Claire, what happened? You need to sit down. My heart immediately started racing, because nobody says that before good news. Nobody. Then she said 6 words. 6 words that changed everything. Ethan is trying to disappear. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just divorce, wasn't just betrayal, wasn't just fraud. Something much bigger was happening. And if we didn't stop him quickly, the man I'd spent 11 years loving was about to vanish with hundreds of millions of dollars. The first rumor started on a Thursday. By Friday morning, it was everywhere. Ethan Blackwell had disappeared. Not missing, not kidnapped, not harmed, gone. His private office was empty. His executive assistant hadn't heard from him. His personal driver said he'd been dismissed indefinitely. His phone went straight to voicemail, and his penthouse apartment sat completely dark. No lights, no movement, nothing. The billionaire who had spent years building an empire had vanished overnight. And somehow, the media found out before I did. I woke up to 37 missed calls, 22 text messages, 5 voicemails, and a news alert. I remember staring at my phone, confused, then reading the headline: TAS billionaire Ethan Blackwell reported missing amid fraud investigation. For a second, I thought it had to be fake. Then my phone rang again. Sarah. I answered immediately. Tell me that's not real. It is. My stomach dropped. What happened? We think he ran. Ran. The word felt surreal. People run from danger. People run from war. People run from disasters. People don't usually run from marriages. At least normal people don't. But nothing about Ethan had felt normal lately. By noon, reporters were parked outside my house. By evening, helicopters were circling downtown. By the next day, financial networks were discussing Ethan like he was already guilty. Investors were panicking. Partners were panicking. Employees were panicking. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, I was still trying to understand how my life became national news. Then Sarah called again, and this time, she wasn't talking about Ethan. She was talking about Vanessa. Claire, what now? We were wrong. That got my attention immediately. What do you mean? A pause, then, I don't think Vanessa is helping him anymore. I sat up, because for weeks we'd assumed Vanessa was part of everything. The affair, the fraud, the planning, the lies. She was in every document, every transfer, every company, every suspicious transaction. She was everywhere. Then Sarah sent me a file, a witness statement, 22 pages, signed, notarized, legally binding, from Vanessa herself. I opened it expecting excuses, expecting manipulation, expecting blame shifting. Instead, I found something completely different. The statement began with one sentence, a sentence that changed everything. I believed Ethan Blackwell was legally divorced. I read it twice, then 3 times, then 4, because suddenly nothing made sense anymore. According to Vanessa's statement, Ethan had told her years ago that his marriage ended quietly. No public divorce, no court battle, no drama, just a private separation agreement. He even showed her paperwork. Paperwork she believed. Paperwork that apparently didn't exist. Then came the second bombshell. Vanessa wasn't helping Ethan hide money, at least not intentionally. She thought she was helping him protect assets from hostile investors. Not his wife, not me. Investors. Sarah explained it carefully. Claire, if this statement is true, what? Vanessa may be another victim. I almost laughed, because that sounded impossible. The woman I hated, the woman I blamed, the woman I imagined destroying my marriage. A victim? No chance. Then I kept reading, and the further I got, the worse I felt, because Ethan had lied to her too, repeatedly, systematically, for years, the same lies, the same manipulation, the same charm, the same promises, the same emotional control, just aimed at someone else. I remember staring at the final page, feeling something unexpected, not anger, not jealousy, pity. Have you ever hated someone only to discover they were being deceived too? It's a strange feeling, like discovering you've been fighting the wrong battle, because suddenly Vanessa wasn't my enemy. She was evidence. And Ethan was becoming something far worse than a cheating husband. 3 days later, everything exploded. Sarah called me at 11:04 p.m., late enough that I knew it wasn't good news. I answered immediately. What happened? We found a witness. My heart started racing. What kind of witness? A former employee. Former employee. Those 2 words ended up changing everything. His name was Daniel Foster, and for 7 years, he had worked directly beneath Ethan, not high enough to make decisions, but close enough to see things. Lots of things. Daniel had stayed silent for years because he needed the paycheck, needed the insurance, needed the job. Then Ethan disappeared, and suddenly, silence wasn't protecting anyone anymore. The meeting happened in Sarah's office, private, confidential, no cameras, no reporters, just 4 people. Sarah, me, Daniel, and a recorder. Daniel looked terrified, the kind of terrified you only see in people carrying secrets. His first sentence chilled me. I don't think Ethan planned this for 4 years. Sarah leaned forward. What do you mean? Daniel swallowed, then answered. I think he planned it from the beginning. The room went silent. Beginning. Not 4 years, not 5, 11. I felt physically sick. Daniel opened a folder. Inside were emails, internal memos, corporate communications, documents, hundreds of them. Then he pointed to one, dated 8 years earlier, 3 years after Ethan proposed. The subject line read, Long-term asset separation strategy. My hands started shaking, because the email wasn't discussing a future divorce. It wasn't discussing legal protection. It wasn't discussing business concerns. It was discussing me, by name, and according to the email, Ethan had been worried that future success could create marital complications. Marital complications. That was how he described me. Not wife, not partner, not family. Complication. The next document was worse, much worse, an internal planning memo, written years before the first suspicious transfer. One paragraph stood out. I still remember every word, because it changed the way I viewed my entire marriage. The paragraph said, maintain appearance of normal domestic relationship until restructuring is complete. Appearance, not relationship. Appearance. I stopped breathing for a second, because suddenly, every anniversary dinner, every vacation, every gift, every romantic speech, every promise, every I love you, became questionable. Was any of it real? Or had I spent 11 years married to a performance? Daniel wasn't finished. Not even close. He pulled out one final document, a spreadsheet, simple, organized, detailed, and beside dozens of transactions was a category, protection measures. The entries listed lawyers, consultants, financial planners, private investigators, private investigators. My stomach dropped. What were they investigating? Danielle looked at me, then looked away. You. The room went silent again, because Ethan hadn't just planned financially, he had planned personally. background checks, social reviews, employment monitoring, financial tracking. For years, the man I trusted most had been collecting information on me, not because I did something wrong, because he expected someday he might need it. And that realization hurt more than the affair, more than the fraud, more than the lawsuit, because betrayal from anger is one thing. Betrayal from calculation is something else entirely. Then Danielle said something that changed the entire case. One sentence, one tiny sentence. Ethan wasn't the smartest person in the room. Sarah frowned. What does that mean? Danielle hesitated, then answered. Someone else was giving orders. For the first time that night, I felt genuine fear, because if Ethan wasn't the mastermind, then who was? And why had nobody seen them? Danielle slowly opened another folder. Inside was a photograph neither Sarah nor I had seen before. When he slid it across the table, every hair on my arm stood up. Because the person standing beside Ethan wasn't Vanessa. It wasn't an investor. It wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't a business partner. It was someone from my own life. Someone I trusted. Someone who had been beside me through everything. And in that moment, I realized the betrayal was much bigger than my marriage, much bigger than Ethan, much bigger than money, because the person truly orchestrating everything had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. For a long time after Danielle slid that photograph across the table, nobody spoke. Not me, not Sarah, not even Danielle. Because sometimes the truth arrives so suddenly, your brain refuses to process it. You see it, you understand it, but you can't accept it. Not immediately, not when it's that painful. The photograph wasn't blurry, it wasn't distant, it wasn't questionable. It was crystal clear, taken outside a private restaurant. Ethan was standing beside someone, laughing, holding documents, looking comfortable, familiar, trusted, and the person beside him was Rachel, my best friend. The same Rachel who had sat in my kitchen. The same Rachel who brought coffee when I cried. The same Rachel who helped me read the lawsuit. The same Rachel who hugged me and promised she'd never leave my side. Rachel, I remember staring at the photo, waiting for it to make sense. Waiting for someone to explain it. Waiting for reality to correct itself. It never did. No. That was all I could say. Just one word. No. Daniel nodded slowly, like he'd expected this reaction. I know. No. I said it again. Louder this time. More desperate. That's impossible. Sarah didn't say anything. She just kept looking at the photo. Then she quietly asked, "When was this taken?" Daniel looked down at the file. 3 years ago. 3 years. 3 years. The exact amount of time Ethan had supposedly been restructuring everything. The exact amount of time the lawsuit timeline focused on. The exact amount of time Rachel had suddenly become more involved in my life. My stomach twisted, because memories were starting to connect. The advice, the conversations, the encouragement, the subtle suggestions. Every time I doubted Ethan, Rachel defended him. Every single time. Have you ever looked back at years of friendship and suddenly realized someone was steering your decisions? Not controlling, just nudging, tiny pushes, tiny suggestions, tiny pieces of advice, enough to change outcomes, not enough to trigger suspicion. That's what started happening in my mind. Memory after memory, conversation after conversation. And suddenly, nothing felt innocent anymore. Sarah finally broke the silence. How involved was she? Daniel's answer changed everything. More than Ethan. The room froze. What? Daniel nodded. Ethan signed things. He approved things. But Rachel designed most of it. I genuinely thought I'd misheard him, because Rachel wasn't a lawyer, wasn't an executive, wasn't a financial expert. At least that's what I thought. Then Daniel handed us another file, and suddenly, I realized how little I actually knew about my best friend. Rachel wasn't working freelance consulting like she'd always claimed. She wasn't struggling financially. She wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. And she definitely wasn't the ordinary person she'd pretended to be. Rachel owned part of a consulting company, a very successful consulting company, one that specialized in corporate asset protection. Asset protection. The same phrase appearing throughout Ethan's records. The same phrase Sarah kept finding. The same phrase connected to every suspicious transfer. I felt physically ill, because suddenly the impossible became obvious. Rachel had access to me. Ethan had access to money, and together they had built something massive, something hidden, something designed around one assumption, that I would never find out. The next 48 hours were chaos. Sarah immediately subpoenaed Rachel's records. Rachel immediately disappeared, not metaphorically, literally. Phone disconnected, apartment empty, email inactive, social media deleted, gone. The moment legal pressure arrived, Rachel ran, and innocent people don't usually run. By now, the media frenzy had become enormous. News vans outside my house, financial analysts discussing the scandal, experts making predictions, internet detectives inventing theories. Nobody knew the truth yet, not even close. Then came the call everyone had been waiting for. Ethan had been found. I remember exactly where I was. Sarah's office. Wednesday afternoon, 3:17 p.m. Her phone rang. She answered, listened, then slowly looked at me. They found him. The room immediately went silent. Where? Sarah took a breath. Switzerland. Of course. Because apparently every rich person in trouble eventually ends up in Switzerland. He'd been staying in a private resort under an assumed identity, using a corporate account, traveling through connections nobody thought to check. The plan would have worked too, except somebody made a mistake. A very expensive mistake. While deleting records, Rachel accidentally triggered an audit flag. The audit exposed transactions. The transactions exposed travel records. The travel records exposed Ethan. For the first time in months, their perfect plan cracked. And once it cracked, everything started collapsing. Fast. The next bombshell arrived 2 days later. Sarah called me before sunrise. That alone terrified me. Nobody calls before sunrise with good news, ever. When I answered, her voice sounded different. Not worried, not angry, not stressed. Excited. Claire, what happened? We got the account. What account? The hidden one. The hidden one. For months they'd been chasing rumors. Whispers, missing money, invisible assets. Now they'd found them. And the number attached to that account made my head spin. $368 million. Hidden. Moved through layers of companies, trusts, shell entities, foreign accounts. 368 million. I remember laughing. Not because it was funny, because sometimes numbers become so absurd your brain rejects them. The account records contained everything. Every transfer, every signature, every authorization, every conversation, including one conversation neither Ethan nor Rachel ever expected anyone to see. A recording, time-stamped at 18 months earlier, private, confidential, and devastating. Sarah played it for me. The voices were unmistakable. Rachel first, then Ethan. Rachel sounded annoyed. She still trusting you? Ethan laughed. Actually laughed. The sound still makes me sick. Then he said something I'll never forget. She trusts everyone. Rachel laughed too. Then came the sentence that destroyed whatever sympathy I still had. That's why this is so easy. Easy 11 years. My marriage, my trust, my future. Easy. I sat there staring at the table, because at that moment, something finally changed inside me. The sadness disappeared. The confusion disappeared. The grief disappeared. And for the first time, I became angry. Not emotional anger, focused anger. The kind that builds quietly, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that wins. Because suddenly, I wasn't trying to save my marriage anymore. I wasn't trying to understand Ethan. I wasn't trying to repair anything. I was trying to expose them, and for the first time, we had enough evidence to do exactly that. Then Sarah smiled, a rare smile, the kind lawyers save for moments they know they've already won. What? I asked. She slid another document across the desk. A federal cooperation agreement, signed, not by Ethan, by Rachel. And when I saw the date, my heart nearly stopped, because Rachel had been secretly negotiating with investigators for months, which meant one thing. Rachel wasn't running from the investigation. She was running from Ethan, and whatever she knew was apparently terrifying enough to make her betray the man she'd spent years helping. The question wasn't whether Ethan would lose anymore. The question was, what secret was so dangerous that even Rachel decided to turn against him? For months I thought I knew the story. A husband betrayed his wife. A billionaire hid money. A best friend helped him. A marriage collapsed. Simple, painful, but simple. I was wrong, because the truth wasn't about money. It wasn't about the affair, and it wasn't even about the lawsuit. The truth was about something much uglier, something that started before Ethan ever proposed, before he built the company, before he became rich, before he told me he loved me. The truth started the day he met me, and when Rachel finally revealed it, I wished she hadn't. 3 weeks after Ethan was found in Switzerland, Rachel agreed to testify. Not publicly, not yet. First, she met with federal investigators, then corporate attorneys, then Sarah, then me. I hadn't seen her since everything exploded. Not one text, not one call, nothing. The meeting happened in a private conference room. No cameras, no reporters, no audience, just 4 people: Sarah, Rachel, me, and a recorder documenting every word. Rachel looked different, older, smaller, exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept in months. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked directly at me and said something I never expected. "I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed, a cold laugh, the kind people make when they're too angry to cry. "You helped destroy my life." Rachel lowered her eyes. "I know. You lied to me for years. I know. You sat in my kitchen while all this was happening." Tears appeared in her eyes. "I know." For a second, I thought she was about to apologize. She didn't. Instead, she said something worse. "Claire, I wasn't the reason Ethan chose you." The room went silent, because that sentence made no sense. What does that mean? Rachel took a deep breath, then opened a folder. Inside were documents. Old documents, very old documents, 11 years old. My stomach tightened immediately, because 11 years earlier was exactly when I met Ethan. Rachel slid one paper across the table. An investor profile. Not Ethan's, mine. I stared at it, confused. Then I saw my father's name, and suddenly I stopped breathing. My father died when I was 21, long before Ethan became successful, long before the company exploded, long before any of this. But before he died, my father had done something I rarely talked about. He'd invested early in several technology startups. Most failed. A few survived. One survived spectacularly, and apparently someone noticed. Rachel's voice was quiet. "When Ethan met you," she hesitated, then finished the sentence. "He already knew who your father was." The room disappeared, not literally, but that's how it felt. Like everything around me suddenly lost focus, because I remembered meeting Ethan, the coffee shop, the conversation, the chance encounter, the awkward introduction. The moment I'd always believed was fate. Wasn't, Rachel continued. Ethan researched potential investors constantly. He found your father's records. He knew your family connections. He knew your inheritance situation. He knew your father's portfolio. He knew everything. Every word felt like a knife. Because suddenly, the most romantic story of my life became a business strategy. The coffee shop wasn't random. The conversation wasn't random. The relationship wasn't random. Nothing was random. Have you ever discovered your favorite memory was built on a lie? It's devastating, because you don't just lose the truth, you lose the memory too. And that's exactly what was happening. Rachel wasn't finished, not even close, because the next revelation was worse, much worse. Ethan didn't expect to fall in love with you. I stared at her. What? Rachel nodded. He told me that himself. For the first time all day, I didn't know what to feel, because suddenly the story became complicated again. Not better, not kinder, just more complicated. According to Rachel, the original plan was simple. Meet me, build trust, create connections, leverage opportunities, grow the company, move on. That was supposedly the plan. Then something changed. Ethan actually fell in love. Real love, unexpected love, complicated love, the kind nobody planned, the kind that ruins plans. And for years, that love was real, at least according to Rachel. For a second, part of me wanted to believe her. Then I remembered the recordings, the signatures, the lies, the lawsuit, and I pushed the thought away, because real love doesn't do those things, does it? Rachel answered that question too, and her answer shocked everyone. Ethan changed after the first billion. The room went quiet again, because money changes people. Everybody says that, but most people imagine greed, arrogance, ego. What happened to Ethan was different. According to Rachel, success didn't make him selfish. Success made him afraid, terrified, obsessed, paranoid. Every year he became more convinced someone wanted what he built. Investors, partners, employees, friends, family, everyone, including me, especially me. That fear slowly became obsession. The obsession became planning. The planning became betrayal. And eventually, the betrayal became his entire life. Rachel wiped tears from her face. Then she delivered the final secret. The secret that explained everything. Ethan never intended to leave you. Sarah immediately frowned. Then why build all of this? Rachel looked exhausted, because she already knew how insane the answer sounded. He thought you would leave him. Nobody spoke, because it sounded ridiculous, absurd, impossible. Yet somehow, it explained everything. Every hidden account, every contingency plan, every asset transfer, every investigation, every signature. He wasn't preparing to abandon me. He was preparing to survive me, or at least, the imaginary version of me he'd created in his head. The version who would someday betray him, take his money, destroy his company, leave him, the version that never existed. Months later, the trial began. And it wasn't even close. The evidence was overwhelming. The forged signatures, the recordings, the hidden accounts, the corporate fraud, the conspiracy, the asset transfers, everything. By the second week, Ethan's attorneys stopped trying to win. They started negotiating. Rachel cooperated fully. Her testimony reduced her penalties dramatically. Ethan wasn't so lucky. The financial settlement alone was catastrophic. Hundreds of millions exposed, assets frozen, investigations expanded, partnerships terminated. The empire survived, barely. But Ethan's reputation didn't. That was gone forever. The final time I saw him happened 18 months later. Not in court, not at a hearing, not in a deposition, at a coffee shop, ironically, the same kind of place where we'd met. He looked older, much older, not because of age, because of consequences. For a few minutes, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan finally broke the silence. You know I loved you. I looked at him for a long moment, because strangely enough, I believed him. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough. I think he loved me, and I think he destroyed us anyway. Both things can be true. Sometimes love isn't the opposite of betrayal. Sometimes love exists beside it. And that's what makes betrayal hurt so much. Because if villains hurt you, life is simple. But when someone loves you and hurts you anyway, that's harder, much harder. When we stood to leave, Ethan said one final thing, something I still think about. If I had trusted you, he stopped, looked away, then smiled sadly. We would have had everything, maybe. Or maybe we already did, and he just couldn't see it. I walked away without looking back, not because I hated him, not because I wanted revenge, because for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying his fear anymore. The lawsuit ended, the investigations ended, the headlines disappeared, life moved on, and eventually, so did I. Looking back now, the biggest lesson wasn't about money, or marriage, or betrayal. It was this. The people who spend their lives preparing for betrayal often create the very thing they're afraid of. Ethan spent years protecting himself from losing me, and in the process, he guaranteed it. If you're listening to this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever trusted someone who was too afraid to trust you back? What happened? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes the saddest endings don't come from a lack of love. They come from a lack of trust. The end.